Steps to help reduce the incidence of veteran suicides.
Today, the Hampton VA launched a new pilot program where military peers are trained to spot signs of trouble for fellow vets in crisis. 13 News Now reporter Mike Gooding has details.
I really love to help people, and just becoming a peer recovery specialist will help me do that, help me to help my peers overcome anything that they're going through.
Veterans have a suicide rate 50% higher than those who did not serve in the military. Nearly 1 in every 5 suicides nationally is a veteran. And that's where these folks come in. They're the first 10 graduates of what's called the VA Peer Support Program. It's part of a national initiative named in honor of the late Marine Corps Corporal Clay Hunt, who took his own life at age 28 after deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan.
And the point of this is to hopefully reach them and create that connection. Not as a clinician or somebody diagnosing them, but to really meet them on a level that is personal and can offer that hope and support that they need.
The idea here is to make contact with military members before they even get out of the military. According to the Department of Veterans Affairs in 2014, the most recent year for which state-by-state data is available, in Virginia, 227 military veterans committed suicide. 214 were men, 13 were women.
The need is still great, and the saddest part about that number of 20 is that only 6 are engaged in VA services at the time that they commit suicide. So there are a lot more people out there that we need to make contact with and help, and that's why this program targeting transitioning service members is so important to us.
And the VA has a toll-free confidential veteran crisis hotline. It's 1-800-273-8255. Press 1. Mike Gooding, 13 News Now.